Hey everybody, my name is Denise and I'm here at Nuttles in Salt Lake City. I want to teach you how to load fabric onto your quilt frame. So some of you may be watching this because you just got a brand new quilt frame. Some of you may be watching this because you've been quilting for a while and you just need a new way to load your backing and your batting and your quilt top onto your frame to achieve success. So I'm going to show you a really easy method that I have developed over learning from different people, and I'm going to show you on the Bernina frame. It may not necessarily be the frame that you own, but it will apply all pretty much the same. So this is my rail that my backing is going to go onto here. I've got my leader on. Your leader needs to be really smooth and straight. So when the leader is attached to the rail, it needs to be pretty straight. I don't worry too much if the lines on my leaders are exactly lined up to each other. Some leaders have a center point. I personally don't necessarily worry too much about the lines and the markings on the leaders. I just load right onto the leader. So you'll see what I mean in a second. So another thing that I do when I load my quilt is I don't base my loading process on this piece of fabric, my backing fabric being completely square, because if it's a 90-inch piece of fabric, it's really hard to make that piece of fabric square. So I'm gonna kind of throw that out the window. I'm assuming this piece of fabric isn't perfectly straight and even, and I think that happens pretty much every time. I think it's really impossible to make a big, large piece of fabric perfectly square. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I've got my backing fabric face down on draped over my backing leader, and I've got about the same amount of fabric draped over the backing as I do leader hanging down. So can you see that it's about even here? So I don't have like a lot of leader hanging down below my backing. They're about even, or the backing is hanging a little bit longer. The next thing that I'm gonna do is start in the middle, and I kind of just cup my hand over that backing leader. Can you see how the fabric is shifting a little bit? The reason it's shifting is because the grain of the fabric is not lined up evenly on the rail. So I'm going to start again from here, and as I go, you see this has to kind of scoot over a little bit. So I'm going to start in the middle, and can you see there's like no more shifting going on here? So the grain of that fabric I can trust is really straight and even with the leader. Okay, then I'm going to work from the other half and do the exact same thing and smooth the fabric, and you can see it shifting a little bit. And then once I just take one last shot over this. So I'm not stretching the fabric, I'm just smoothing it out so the grain is nice and straight and even. And then when I look at how low this is hanging in relation to my leader, again, like I said before, I want to make sure that my backing is at least as low as the leader, if not hanging a little bit lower. Okay, so maybe like that. The next thing that I'll do is take my nice strong pins. I like to use these heavy, they're really strong and sharp. Some of the other ones will bend a little too easily, and this leader is nice and durable. So what I'm gonna do next, well, let me back up. Notice how now this side of the fabric is kind of sagging a little bit lower, right? It's not totally even this side to this side, okay? So I'm not gonna now go and take this fabric that I just so carefully smoothed out and line it up to the bottom of my leader and then pin. That defeats the whole purpose of the squareness of the fabric and lining it all up evenly. So instead, what I'm going to do is just let this hang and grab right into the leader. I'm being really generous with where I'm pinning here, but I'm going to show you on the back side. The fabric is just draping down nice and flat, and I've pinned 1/4 of an inch or so, whatever you want this to be. This is 1/4 of an inch into the leader. Okay, so now every other pin that I put in needs to hang, and I go a couple, maybe 3 inches apart. My next pin is gonna go same thing, same distance up in my leader, okay? So continue on like that until you get all the way across in both directions, on both sides. Notice I started from the middle and I worked my way out. Okay, so I've pinned all the way across. You can really notice over here, I've got just a little bit of extra backing hanging over. and on this side it's way longer, which just means the fabric wasn't cut perfectly straight, and that's what I knew that was going to happen. I knew that usually is what happens. So the next thing that we're going to do is roll the backing fabric all up on the rail. I'm going to lock this rail here and start to roll my quilt on, my backing on. What happens when we do this is in the middle, it gets loose and baggy and wants to be a little bit looser. Whereas on the edges, it wants to be really tight. Just the way gravity pulls on the fabric, the edges start to be really, really tight. So if you've ever loaded a quilt or a backing, or you've quilted half your quilt and then you start to notice this big old sag on the sides of your quilt, which I'm sure you've experienced if you've done some long arm quilting, it's because this is getting rolled so much tighter, and therefore it's leaving more sag hanging later. So what I need you to do instead is kind of work the middle a little bit so it's nice and tight, and then the exact same process as we did. See how this is already kind of wanting to shift out and even out. So I'm not stretching the fabric, but I'm just smoothing it so that grain is remaining straight all the way across. And then I'm going to roll about 3 rotations and then get that middle to be tighter, and you're almost making the edges a little bit looser. So the tension on the edge to the middle should be the same. And then continue rolling and rolling and rolling until you're not going to go all the way to the other end, because the next thing that we need to do is take this to the back and load it to the back leader. So I have rolled up the backing on the front side as far as I need to go, and then frames are going to vary a little bit here. Some frames, the rail that you're loading your backing onto will be this one. On some other frames, this one's just a tension bar, and we load the fabric onto this rail. So if you notice, I've gone under the tension bar. It's really important that you go under this, and then I've come right up and over, and it follows the same path as my leader does, okay? So under and then over, and then what I've done next is I've smoothed this all out. I've made this all nice and flat here, and then what you're gonna do is come to the back and pin. So I've smoothed over the back, I've smoothed this so the grain is lined up just like I had done before, and now what I want you to notice is I've got my leader, same as on the front side. The length of my backing and my leader are about the same, but look on this side, it's a little bit longer. And I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. That's just some excess that was maybe a little bit uneven from when we cut. So I'm going to pin again into my leader. I can feel about 1/4 inch distance, but you can put these pins at whatever height you want. So in this particular leader, there's a seam about 1 inch up. If you want to use that as your guide and pin into that spot because you can feel it, that's fine. As long as all of your pins are consistently pinned at the same height in your leader. It doesn't matter about the height of the fabric. What matters is the height of the leader that you pin into. So I like to be about 1/4 inch up from the bottom of the leader because I can feel that pretty easily. But if you want to be in that seam, or if you want to be at a different distance, whatever it is that's comfortable for you, as long as they're consistent. So I'm not expecting you to go and like measure that 1/4 inch distance every time. So now I need to drape this back over to the front.
I have no idea.
And probably roll it up just a little bit so that the front and the backing are even. We're going to go back to the front side of the frame and you'll see what I mean.
And I took it in.
So I draped over the leader from the back. I'm just going to roll this up until the quilt backing leader is about here. I don't want the backing to be rolled up because I need to use that backing. Unless you've got tons of excess, I like to utilize as much as I can of the backing and not run short. Then what we need to do is finish rolling all of this excess that we've been using over the back side. So I need to follow the same process as I did before. Roll a couple of times, allow tension on that rail, and smooth. Remember, this is going to have to probably be smushed up a little bit. I'm not stretching the fabric, I'm just making it be so that everything remains consistent, so it's not really tight on the edges. Roll a couple of times, smooth, you'll feel where that grain needs to shift a little bit. And then by the time you get to the end, hopefully what you end up with something totally flat like this. So hopefully, maybe in the past, when you've gotten to this point where everything should be flat, you had this big old sag on the sides and tighter in the middle, and that's because this stuff was getting rolled way tighter than the middle section was. But we kept the whole roll nice and consistent as far as the tension on the fabric, and now it's perfectly flat. So that's how I load my backing. I hope this has been helpful. I'm going to, next thing that I'm going to do is take my batting, which is right here, and I float my batting. So this is going to be my batting, and this will just float on the top. I have a whole separate video on how to keep this all square as you quilt, so make sure to check out that video too. But this process takes a little bit of time, in practice, I mean. So practice it, try it out. Remember that your backing is not square. I promise you, the backing, no matter how hard we try, look at how cute that is, the backing is not generally square, even if you're really careful about how you cut that. It's really easy for that to not be quite even. So we're basing the process that I just showed you on that backing piece not being totally square, and that's okay. Our quilt's gonna come out perfectly square. So this I just float on the top. Again, I have a separate video where I show you how to keep this all square as I go, and that's how I load my quilt. So thank you for watching. If you have questions, please let me know, and I hope it helped.